That doesn't, yeah.
This is a reading from the 16th chapter of John. Jesus said to them, "Do you now believe? The hour is coming. Indeed, it has come, when you will be scattered, each one to his home, and you will leave me alone. Yet I am not alone, because the Father is with me. I have said this to you so that in me you may have peace. In the world you face persecution, but take courage. I have conquered the world." On March 2nd, 1955, in Montgomery, Alabama, a high school student named Claudette Colvin refused to give up her seat on the bus so that white passengers could sit down. Police took her off the bus, arrested her, and handcuffed her to take her to the city jail. The local NAACP leader, a man named E.D. Nixon, bailed Colvin out of jail and then consulted with a local white lawyer named Clifford Durr, who had been the only civil rights lawyer in Montgomery for many years. The two men talked about whether they could use Claudette Colvin's case to put segregation itself on trial. But Colvin was an unwed pregnant teenager who was prone to outbursts of profanity. They decided that they couldn't build a case against segregation founded on her. 6 months later, on October 21st, 1955, in Montgomery, Alabama, a Black woman named Mary Louise Smith refused to give up her seat on the bus so that a white woman could sit down. She was arrested, convicted, and fined $9. There was another flurry of Black interest. Was this the case that they could use to put segregation on trial? But Smith lived in a poverty-stricken clapboard shack way out in the country, and her father was an alcoholic. E.D. Nixon decided that she would not be any better a rallying point than Claudette Colvin. In the end, she paid her fine. 6 weeks later, on December 1st, 1955, in Montgomery, Alabama, Rosa Parks, a seamstress at a downtown department store, refused to give up her seat so that a white man could sit in one of the empty seats in her row. Rosa Parks was the secretary of the local NAACP. She spoke quietly and her grammar was excellent. She was described as, quote, one of those rare people of whom everyone agreed that she gave more than she got, unquote. Finally, here was a woman that Black laborers and cleaning women, as well as Black teachers and other professionals, could all support. Nixon and the white lawyer, Durr, agreed that she could present the test case for putting segregation on trial, the rallying point, if she was willing. The fact that Rosa Parks was not the first Black woman to stay seated on a bus doesn't in any way diminish the courage that it took to keep her seat. When she was finally allowed to call her mother after her arrest, her mother's first response was to groan deeply and ask, "Did they beat you?" When Nixon and Durr asked whether she would be willing to have her case used as a test of the legality of segregation on buses, Rosa's husband was terrified. He couldn't stand the idea of what might happen if she lost the case and were forced to spend more time in jail. "The white folks will kill you," he said, as he pleaded with her not to do it. It was in order to support Rosa Parks' trial that the Montgomery bus boycott began. A group of Black women who belonged to a group called the Women's Political Council, many of whom were teachers at Montgomery's Black State College, gathered in the middle of the night to discuss how to support the Parks case. They wrote a general letter of protest, which they hoped would be distributed among Montgomery's Black population as widely as possible. It read, in part, "Another Negro woman has been arrested and thrown into jail because she refused to get up out of her seat on the bus and give it to a white person. Until we do something to stop these arrests, they will continue. The next time it may be you or you or you. This woman's case will come up Monday. We are, therefore, asking every Negro to stay off the buses on Monday in protest of the arrest and the trial." After that beginning, ministers and community leaders began organizing. They still saw themselves as working for a successful bus boycott of a single day. And it was surprising to all those leaders when the boycott on that Monday worked. When they didn't see Blacks on the buses passing their houses, when they drove around the city in their own cars and saw no Blacks on the buses of any of the lines. And when, as expected, Rosa Parks was convicted of violating the Alabama bus segregation laws, it was even more surprising that it didn't happen in an empty courthouse. After her lawyer filed a notice of appeal and Nixon from the NAACP went to pay the bond for her release, he was astonished to find that there were some 500 Black people jamming the halls of the courthouse, spilling through the doors and down the stairs to the street. This didn't usually happen for a Black defendant for any reason. Usually there were a few worried family members. Nixon was rattled by the crowd and also by the worried policemen watching them carrying shotguns. He tried to get the crowd to disperse, promising to bring Rosa Parks outside as soon as the bond was signed. Several voices shouted back at him that the crowd would storm the courthouse to rescue both Nixon and Parks if they didn't come through the courthouse doors within a few minutes. And that was the point at which Montgomery's Black leaders realized that something new had come into being in Montgomery that day. In the end, the boycott that Black leaders weren't sure would last a day lasted nearly a year. And Rosa Parks' case was used to strike down the Alabama bus segregation laws. Martin Luther King Jr. was fond of quoting a line from an abolitionist preacher who lived a century before him, Theodore Parker. "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice," Parker had written. "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice." I often wonder how we sell ourselves short when we reduce an arc to a single point, to one individual's act of heroism, to one action divorced from its context. Because without for a moment lessening the courage required for one decisive act, we dismiss the hundreds of thousands of lesser acts of courage which contribute to the success of the greater act. Quite probably Rosa Parks' act of courage would have come to no fruition without the school teachers who were willing to be arrested for carpooling with other Blacks, without the ministers who were willing to be indicted and arrested for organizing the carpools, without the Women's Political Council who all put their jobs on the line when they decided to use the state-owned mimeograph machine at Alabama State College in order to copy the hundreds of leaflets they knew they needed in order to start the bus boycott. And part of what I know I do when I forget about all those other smaller contributions, the loan of a car, the willingness to drive, is that I put the decisive action beyond myself. I don't have to worry about what I'm going to do in a crisis or when some action for justice is required, because I'm obviously not a hero. I'm not that brave, and that kind of courage is beyond me. Which is an easy way to get myself off the hook, really, to decide I simply don't have the courage for anything big, or I have too many responsibilities and I can't risk it. But in times like these, it doesn't hurt to remember that the courage I need may be much less than I think. Nor does it hurt to remember that God, the inward Christ in my very heart, can encourage me. Which is the point of Jesus' encouragement to his disciples in the 16th chapter of John. I am not alone, because the Father is with me. I have said this to you so that in me you may have peace. In the world you will face persecution, but take courage, because I have conquered the world. In other words, the light within, the inner teacher, can be courage itself. As Martin Luther King himself found in his moments of doubt during the Montgomery campaign. One night, a few days after his first arrest ever for being a part of the Montgomery bus boycott carpool, consider for a moment that it was illegal to carpool in order to keep Black people on the buses. But after his first arrest for being a part of the Montgomery bus boycott carpool, King sat alone in his kitchen, overwhelmed. The hatred coming from the whites, the rigidity and classism coming from some of the Blacks, the neediness of others, the never-ending phone calls, they were all too much. He had no idea what to do to satisfy everyone who demanded something from him. And though at that time he was in his mid-20s, he didn't have a clear faith in a God who would listen. His doubt and his fear became prayer. And he ended by saying, I've come to the point where I can't face it alone. As soon as he spoke the words, he could feel the fear leaving him. He became aware of a voice from inside him telling him to do what he thought was right. He felt then the courage to face anything he had to face. It was the first transcendent religious experience of his life, the first time he had felt the mystery beyond reason, which confirmed his belief that religion was not simply a good idea, but a true experience of an unnameable reality. And I think that it was Martin Luther King Jr. experiencing the reality of Christ's promise in the Gospel of John. In the world you will face persecution, but take courage because I have conquered the world. For me, it helps to have faith in that promise when I consider the long, long arc of the moral universe. Whenever I encounter that passage or remember it, I'm reminded of a message that the Quaker Chuck Fager has given to several yearly meetings, in which he calls on friends to embark on a 100-year lamb's war for peace. We need a long-range vision, he says. Instead, we keep ourselves distracted by believing that every blip in the news is a major battle. The shorter the vision, the larger the obstacles seem. The longer the vision, the clearer the perspective. If I look for peace in an arc, if I see my own actions as some very small part of 100 years campaign for the common good, maybe the courage that requires of me does not have to be so extreme. Wildly extrapolating, perhaps that's also how it was for Rosa Parks. She wasn't the first woman to give up her seat or to not give up her seat on a bus in Montgomery, Alabama. Claudette Colvin had done it. Mary Louise Smith had done it. She could guess that because she was quiet and respectful, she would have a $9 fine. Maybe on that particular day, she figured she was tired enough or fed up enough that she could have the courage to be part of the ark. It was only later for her, for E.D. Nixon, for Ralph Abernathy and Martin Luther King Jr., that the requirements of courage came to be so large and individual, so much more than communal. But on that one day, maybe on December 1st, 1955, she was able to see herself as one small part of a very large arc, as one foot soldier in a very brief skirmish in 100 years war, 100 years campaign for the common good. Perhaps the same thing might be true of us.